Hello and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. You've probably seen me review the Canon 1DS, the Canon 1DS Mark II, and now, will you see me review the Canon 1DS Mark III? No, you will not. Clearly says in the title that I'm reviewing the 1DX. So yes, I'll be reviewing the Canon 1DX, the first of the 1DX series. Before we get started though, I just want to go over how I got this camera in my collection. One day, I just happened to be walking home from, the daily grind, if you will, and I deviate from my normal route. And I go up to another street that I normally don't walk on, and on that street there happens to be a local pawn shop. I decide I'm going to step inside and have a look-see. And inside one of the glass cases, I walk across what appears to be a camera that just barely fits inside the case. I actually don't really know what it is, but I know it's a flagship camera. I kind of assumed it might be an older model, but then, well, older than the 1DX Mark I. But I end up asking them to have a look at it, and when I get it out, I see it's a 1DX, the first one. And I can hardly contain myself. Basically, I found it very hard to believe that someone walked in and traded one of these things. And I then turn the camera on its back and I see a price tag, and it is very, very agreeable. Now, at the time, I wasn't looking to buy a new camera, especially not a full frame flagship of yesteryear, but needless to say, the price was very good. So I promptly purchased it, and here we are. With that, let's get into it. What is the Canon 1DX? Well, the Canon 1DX is the first of the type of this flagship with the moniker X on the end of it, and it was a bit of a departure from your normal 1D series camera. Now, its idea or concept was to bring together the two previously separate 1D camera lines, with the regular 1D models being uncompromising in speed, and with the 1DS models giving you uncompromised image quality. The 1DX was both, at least in terms of marketing. So, was it actually a good blend of speed and image quality? I personally do think so, yes. But with that, let's get into what else the 1DX is. It is a Canon flagship camera released in March of 2012. The camera is of typical flagship construction, magnesium alloy build with a lot of weather sealing. It featured a full-frame 18.1 megapixel CMOS sensor developed in-house by Canon. It had an ISO range of 100 to 51,200, or with the expansion options up to 204,800 ISO. Metering is done by a 100,000 pixel sensor split into 252 zones, and autofocusing is done with a 61-point phase detect system featuring 41 cross points. Now, this camera and its mechanical shutter, it can handle up to 12 FPS, or if you do it with the mirror locked up and shoot JPEGs only, it'll do 14 frames per second. Quite fast. Now, it is clearly a DSLR, so it has an OVF, and as per flagship standards, it is 100% coverage and quite a bit of magnification, 0.76 times I believe. Now, being an older flagship camera, this features card slots that are dual CF card slots. Now, the 1DX is old, but it's not that old. So it actually could shoot video as well. 1080p, 30 frames per second. The battery, it's good for 1120 SEPA rated shots. That's without live view. With live view, it's around 290 shots. Now, this battery and this camera together are quite beefy. It comes in at 1,530 grams, roughly 1.53 plana, almost 0.76 knocked. Quite beefy. And at the time of introduction, this camera came in at 6,799 freedom units, or in modern now SAD dollars, 9,315 USD, or in modern SAD Maple tokens, roughly 12,730 Canadian buckaroos. For a complete spec sheet, I'm going to link to the Canon Museum link on the 1DX below, so click there if you want to know more about the camera. Product advisories. Before we move on, if you're considering a 1DX, make note there was a product advisory out for potentially a lack of lube on the drive mechanism. In America, they will still inspect and repair it for you if you have an affected model. I'll put a link to the advisory in the description below. And if you want to be sure that you don't have one of those models, there's a couple things to look for. One, you can see if you look inside a 1DX camera, there's a flat piece of plastic there. On models that are good, it may have a letter A. Mine does not have that. However, there's another thing that you can look for. You can see there's a little battery tab thingy right there, metal one. Now, if you have one or a 1DX, or you're looking at a 1DX and you want to know whether or not it is one of the affected models, if there's a black mark on the metal tab thing, it is not affected. If it is bare metal all the way across that tab, then it is an affected 1DX model. Again, I'm going to put a link to the advisory below so you can have a better idea of what to actually look for and whether or not the unit that you are looking at could be affected. Shooting with the Canon 1DX, operation and feel. If you've seen my other 1DS reviews, you might expect me to start talking about the two-handed operation of the camera. That is not the case for the 1DX. While the button layout is very similar to the 1D cameras of old, gone are the ways of operating those cameras. Now, it's much more in line with modern Canon UI. And I think that's a good thing. The control scheme is much more intuitive. But first, we're going to get to another point I think that, there's just no avoiding. And that is that this is a substantial lump of a camera. The weight is notable, and it's not for everyone. I am personally okay with the chunky camera, as I'm quite happy with the overall feel and balance of the camera once you actually get it in your hands. But with the big, nice, fast prime, it'll easily tip 2 kilos. So that is something to be aware of if you are shopping for one of these cameras. With the weight out of the way, we can now get into the good stuff. As a Canon flagship camera, you get an integrated vertical grip. And as per the series, it is supremely comfortable. Now, the vertical mode isn't as nicely sculpted as the regular gripping orientation, but it's still good. Now, the space that the grip has to offer is pretty deep, and there's enough room for fairly chunky digits. Now, I don't have super huge hands, but I imagine that if you do, you'll still have a comfortable time operating this camera. Now, the other thing that's quite nice is that you'll notice on the back of the camera, in both orientations, you have controls here and controls there. Another really nice thing about the 1DX is that not only are these buttons and the shutters copied over, but you also get not one, but you get 2 control nubbins, the multi-directional jobbies. And that's quite nice. Again, you can see that in the front of the camera, we have a set of controls here, and again, a mirrored set for the vertical grip. And if you notice these buttons, Here we go. The buttons themselves, each one has a different feel to it, so you know which one you're pressing. And it's those small touches that make this quite awesome. Additionally, along with the fact that these buttons have a different feel to them, each button can be programmed to have an independent function, and you can pick it to be whatever you want. I have mine for the top one to switch it to instant AI servo, toggle, and the bottom one to a spot meter. That's just the way that I like it. Honestly, this particular DSLR might be one of the most user configurable DSLRs I've ever used. Now, on top of the insane level of customization that you get with these cameras and their controls, the nice thing is that from iPoint, you can almost change any of the major functions that you'd want to with just your right hand. You can quickly adjust your focus point. You can, do your AE/AL lock, activate your AF system, change ISO, exposure comp, white balance, all sorts of goodies. And, once you get good at it, you can also roll through your shooting modes, AF drive, and exposure metering modes. Just an excellent control layout. Now, the only thing that I think is kind of misplaced personally is the drive mode change. This is actually something that requires two hands, as you need your right hand to manipulate the buttons and scroll the wheel. But other than that, the controls are fairly nice. Now, again, when you're operating this camera, you will notice that as it is a flagship 1D camera, you get a top display, and it is jam-packed with information. You also get a rear display with a little more info. Now, I don't super use the rear one too much, but it does show you which one of your cards you're writing to, and you can quickly on the fly adjust that option, as well as adjusting whether or not you're shooting RAWs, RAW plus JPEG, that kind of good stuff. Now, the only thing that I find is not great about that is that Canon has decided that no longer are they giving you a blue illumination on these rear panels. You get the amber. Not nearly as cool. That being said, aside from that, it is a great handling camera. Now, let's not forget, as this is a Canon camera, you do get two command dials. One behind your shutter right here, and of course, the giant rear Canon command dial on the back right here. And no need to duplicate that for your vertical grip, as doesn't matter what orientation your hand is in, you will always have the ability to roll that giant command dial. The menu structure is very modern Canon as well. Overall, the structure, it makes sense. It's pretty easy to navigate, but there is a risk of getting lost. And this is especially true if you're trying to tweak the AF settings. Let's have a quick look. If you just notice at the back, the AF settings on their own have 5 individual pages of options, and the amount of changes that you can make as a result are fairly daunting. So sometimes the menus do get a bit confusing and require quite a bit of menu diving. Honestly, I think it could be a little easier, but when you get used to it, it's not too bad kind of diving around the menu. There is just a lot of stuff to go through. Now, on the plus side of looking at the menu is that you actually get to view the camera's beautiful rear screen. It is a 3.2 inch unit, and it is 1.04 millidots. But unfortunately, no touch for this display. Now, the last thing I want to comment on before we move on is the OVF it's big, even by full frame DSLR standards, and that's excellent. And it has one odd party trick, and I'm not really sure if any other camera makers did this, but since there are 61 AF points overlaid on the OVF, it's apparently enough points that the OVF can actually operate a level gauge using those 61 points. It's pretty funky to look at, but it does work pretty well, and it's a very neat trick that the camera can do. Shooting with the Canon 1DX, image quality and autofocus. So the 1DX uses a 18.1 megapixel CMOS sensor. As I said earlier, it's designed and made by Canon. The sensor does have an AA filter over it, but I don't think it heavily impacts the sharpness of the images coming out overall. It's fairly well tuned and nicely restrained. But here's the thing. I've had a lot of cameras in my time of shooting. As far as Canon cameras go, I am surprisingly very, very happy with the output of the 1DX. Now, this is comparing all the other full frame cameras from Canon that I've had throughout the years, which is a few of them, but not all of them. So I've had the 1DS Mark I, 1DS Mark II, 5D Classic, 5D Mark II, and the EOS RP. I'm sure the new R5s, R3s, or whatnot are quite excellent. But for the cameras that I've used up to this point from Canon, the 1DS right now is my favorite one of them all. I'm quite impressed by the output of this 18.1 megapixel sensor. And I know it sounds like 18.1 megapixels is a bit of a letdown, considering that the regular crop of full frame cameras now is basically 24 megapixels at a minimum. But, if you are on this channel, you're probably aware that I will shoot a potato and have fun with it. In all honesty, I am, as I said before, happy with this camera. I tend to cut a lot of older cameras a lot of slack for their age, but really, the 1DX images still hold up to modern standards. The sensor is one, however, though, that was designed prior to Canon realizing that big dynamic range is great at base ISO. But other than that, in all other areas, the camera does keep up pretty well with cameras like the A7 III that I have and the Nikon D600. Overall, I think the files that it produces are really nice. High ISO is solid, and I even find that pushing it quite a lot, the files clean up quite well. And when you consider the dynamic range through the ISO range, the 1DX still holds up fairly well to modern sensors. And, as far as color reproduction, sharpness, you'll get to have a look at that in the examples coming up. But for now, let's have a look at samples comparing the high ISO. Another area where the 1DX shines is autofocus. So no, it is not a billion-point modern system by Sony. It's 61 points, but it's quick, it's accurate, and its ability to track objects is very nice. Setting it up potentially is a pain given the amount of menu options you have to tweak things. However, once you get things up and running, I find that the system is quick and accurate, and the sensor, or the AF sensor, generally covers a fairly sizable chunk of the finder, especially considering it is a DSLR. I'm more than happy to use its very complicated tracking modes and shoot fast moving objects with this camera. I'd still think that if you were to take this out to do sports shooting, it'd do pretty well. Just don't expect, as good a hit rate as like an A1, but it's gonna do pretty well. Now, this only applies, of course, to using the OVF and using the phase detect on board the camera. When you have live view on, it does actually have contrast detect autofocused. However, it's contrast detect autofocus of the days of old, so it's really slow, although accurate, but super slow, like way slower than any contrast detect system that exists now. But with that said, let's have a listen to the gorgeous 12 frames per second that you'd be able to utilize with this fantastic phase detect AF system. Quite nice. It's actually kind of jarring to hear a mechanical shutter do 12 FPS. I know, modern cameras with the E shutter, you can get 120 frames, and modern mechanical shutters on mirrorless cameras will give you 10, 12, 15 frames, but this is giving you 12 frames while also flapping a mirror. So I find that, just a little more satisfying. With that, let's jump into a random AF tracking test I did downtown, and then we'll transition to the photo gallery. Video mode. This camera does have one. It is quite a photo-centric camera though, but at the time that the camera was released, it did have reasonably solid video specs for, again, the time. It's not really up to par for modern shooting for video now, but if you're looking for this camera, you're probably not looking to vlog with the 1DX. You probably are aware that this was part of the era of relatively early DSLR hybrid cameras that just happened to shoot video. This was post popularity of the 5D Mark II, but not so post that you got very nice AF. This camera can technically AF during video recording, but it's not continuous. You gotta manually activate it by using either the AF on button or half pressing the shutter to make it work. And again, it's only contrast detect AF since it doesn't have any on-sensor phase detect points. And plus, this camera's rear display is very fixed, so it's not particularly, good for composing, a lot of creative video options. That being said, if you're curious about how the 1080 footage looks, let's have a look at a couple samples. Recommendation. Do I recommend the 1DX? Yes, I do. At the current going price of 400 USD to 850 USD, depending on condition, you could probably expect to get one for 600 USD if you're looking for one that's just in good shape but not perfect shape. Now, if you are looking for one of these, you might just be looking for a reason to buy a 1 series camera. But you wanted something a little more modern than a 1DS Mark I, but not quite as expensive as the 1DX Mark III. This is a nice middle ground. It's a camera that still offers you a great full-frame sensor, a very rapid mechanical shutter, competent AF module, and again, sensor that outputs very nice images and holds up in most respects to modern cameras of now. Now, I would steer clear if, you're looking for a camera that has extraordinary dynamic range. This doesn't quite have that at its base ISO. But otherwise, there isn't too much to criticize about this camera. The only other things I could think of that pop to mind would be the fact that these cameras, they are quite large. If you've never used a 1D sized camera body before, just beware, it is kind of a pain in the butt to find a bag that fits these nicely, especially if you like using like satchels or messenger bags. I find that when I use this style of camera, I'm limited to like sling bags or backpacks. I do have a couple larger messenger bags that can fit it, but it's usually an awkward fit and it just like feels a bit odd to have such a large lump on my side. And it's not because the camera is too heavy. It's literally the shape of the camera. With the 40mm pancake, it's not terrible, but if you have literally anything else, it will probably jut out the side of the case. So that is something legitimate to take in consideration if you've never used this style of camera body before. Just something to think about. But otherwise, for all the technical gubbins in the camera, it is a marvelous piece of camera to use today still. With all that said and done, you might have guessed I'm quite happy with the 1DX. I know there's no CCD sensor in it, and I know it's not that old of a camera, but the Canon 1 series pro build. It's just amazing to hold in any 1 series DSLR, and this is no exception, and I love it. But this is just my opinion on the 1DX. What are your thoughts on the 1DX? Do you want one? Do you have one? Do you not care? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time. Bye.